Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our End of Life for Windows 10 webinar, where we'll unpack the end of life for Windows 10, along with implications on what this means for countries within Africa and other low and middle income countries. I'm joined by a couple of speakers who are going to be our panelists today. So we'll start with an introduction of the panelists, and then we'll proceed to a session where we'll introduce the entire concept of end of life for Windows 10, highlight implications, and then we'll move to a moderated session where we can further unpack this topic. So our panelists will begin with introductions. We can start with Owen, then we'll go to Daniel, and then Deji, and then Alan. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, all the attendees from wherever you are. Probably I should say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Owen Ombima. I'm an environmental scientist and a sustainability practitioner with over 7 years experience in managing environmental waste, carbon emissions, and environmental technology across various sectors. Glad to be with you today.
Hi everyone, my name is Daniel Mwesigwa. I am a PhD student in information science, and I have very strong interest and experience in technology policy. Basically work at the intersection of computing and its implications for society. Most of my work is embedded in East Africa, although it has resonances with some of the trends and the dynamics that have been happening on the global scene. I'm really excited to talk today and also learn from the panelists and the broader community.
Hi everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, as Owen said earlier. My name is DJ Sarami. I work with Tech Ever Advisory, and we specialize at the intersection of law, business, and technology. I have a keen interest in technology policy, digital rights, digital transformation, and we do work across Africa, both in terms of research and also technical implementation on some of the things that we do research on as well. I'm looking forward to a great conversation with my fellow panelists and getting wonderful insights from here. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Alan Juma. I am a cybersecurity engineer, currently working with ESET East and Southern Africa. So basically I deal with cybersecurity solutions and working with the clients, their cybersecurity maturity journey. Pleasure to be here today.
Okay, Mary, you can also go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Mary Kishuke. I'm the co-founder for Nexus Tech Policy. We deal with policy and tech. We advise startups and tech companies and also work with regulators to just in the development of policies and to be able to give technical support. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thank you guys. My name is Jewel Tete. I work at Nexus Policy Tech as well as a policy and research assistant. And I will begin this session by giving you an introduction and an overview of what end of life means, what the implications are for countries for low and middle income countries, some of the policy takeaways we can get from other jurisdictions, as well as highlighting the policy risks that come with the end of life of Windows 10. So I'll just share my screen.
child. I will enable to share.
Sorry, I'm having a bit of a technical issue. Do you mind sharing the screen on your end?
No worries. Sorry for the technical. Just share the slides with me so that I'm able to present on my end. Apologies, everyone. Just trying to resolve the technical hitch.
I've shared the slides with you.
Okay. Can all see the slides?
Yep, can see on my end.
Still loading. Just give it a minute.
Okay, I'm still yet to see them on my end, but if everyone else can see them, it's okay. I have no problem starting. So end of life is the point at which a product is no longer sold or actively supported by its manufacturer. And it's a stage that typically comes after a defined support period, which may include a phase of mainstream support. Mainstream support typically entails feature updates, security updates, and bug fixes. And this is usually followed by a period of extended support. And this only features security updates and paid updates. So generally, mainstream support for software usually lasts about 5 to 10 years. And for extended support, it's usually between 2 to 5 years. For hardware, it can be anywhere between 3 to 7 years for consumer devices, while it is between 5 to 10 years for enterprise devices. But for this specific topic that we're covering today, according to Microsoft's fixed lifecycle policy, mainstream support is usually provided for 5 years, while extended support is provided for 5 years after that. So once a product reaches end of life, the vendor typically stops full maintenance and development, though responsible vendors sometimes continue to release basic or critical security updates for a limited amount of time. And this allows for continued use without immediate replacement. So what this means is a product doesn't immediately become obsolete. There's a phase of transition. So there's two types of end of life. There's software end of life and there's hardware end of life. And software end of life refers to a point where the developer stops providing updates, bug fixes, or technical support. And some vendors offer extended security updates, like with the case of Microsoft and Windows 10 and the extended security updates for as people transition to Windows 11. For hardware end of life, it's the stage where a manufacturer stops producing spare parts, firmware updates, or repairs, and it makes continued operation dependent on third-party servicing or stockpile parts. So all tech products have a life cycle, and end of life is a common and it's a deliberate practice within the technology industry. Even beyond the technology industry, it is a reality. Life cycle, it's a reality. The life cycle process is a reality for other industries as well. So according to the product life cycle theory, we have 4 stages. This includes introduction, growth, maturity, and decline, which is now commonly referred to as retirement, and what we are now speaking of as end of life. And this is done for a couple of reasons, because as newer and more advanced products emerge, vendors often phase out the older ones to focus on the latest technology. And this naturally aligns with technological advancements, and it allows companies to allocate resources to newer developments. Also, older technology sometimes may not be exactly compatible with newer systems, and it leads to operational inefficiencies and issues with compatibility. So this is a way to incentivize customers to get newer solutions. And finally, it helps manage operational costs in the sense that retiring products that are no longer commercially viable or that run obsolete platforms helps to save costs. So particularly for end of life for Windows 10. This is going to happen on October 14th, 2025, where Microsoft will officially end support for Windows 10. And this means that there's going to be no more security updates, bug fixes, or technical assistance. In other words, the inherent safety net that comes with vendor support is going to gradually decline at this point. And as of August, this year, the status right now is that over 55.95% of users in Africa still rely on Windows 10. In Kenya, this figure is currently at 58.67%, and in India, we are at 57.82%. And this gap means that these regions could be disproportionately exposed to the risks that come with the end of life for this particular Windows 10. And without updates, devices can become more vulnerable to malware and cyber attacks, especially in essential sectors like healthcare, finance, and government, as Windows 10 is still deeply entrenched in the digital infrastructure of public institutions and businesses locally, as we've seen based on the statistics. Actually, the Communication Authority of Kenya has recently published a cybersecurity report for the period between April and June 2025. And this report actually highlights that over 4.5 billion cyber attacks detected have increased. There's over 4.5 billion cyber threat attacks which have been detected, and this is an increase of about 80.7% from the previous quarter. And system attacks form a majority of these cyber threats, forming a whopping 98% of all detected threats. And without appropriate safeguards, the end of life could expand the attack surface exponentially. And this is a reality because many organizations are delaying with Windows 10 migration, as we've seen from the statistics. And the report explicitly mentions that attackers are already successfully exploiting operation system vulnerabilities and inadequate system patching for end of life. It's likely to multiply these vulnerabilities. Interpol has also released a recent report in June on Africa's cyber threats for 2025. And from this report, it's evident that 2/3 of African member countries say that cyber-related offenses account for medium to high share of all crimes. And cybercrime apparently now accounts for more than 30% of all reported crime in Western and Eastern Africa. The report also indicates that 36% of African member states lack confidence in their own capabilities to handle cyber threats. So the end of life of Windows 10 is coming at a period where Africa is already operating within a context where cyber threats are escalating and institutional capacity to handle these cyber threats is limited. And Windows 10 end of life will hit a region that is already clearly struggling with cybersecurity challenges. And even beyond cybersecurity challenges, the end of life poses a different set of threats. For example, we have hardware limitations and the cost of upgrading. Windows 11, for example, it requires a more advanced software and newer generation CPUs, and most of the existing computers in these regions do not meet these requirements and makes them incompatible with this latest development in OS. And replacing devices which are otherwise thought of as functioning simply to meet system requirements can be a bit of a financial overreach for a lot of the public institutions and the businesses that we have locally. Apart from that, we have an impeding e-waste crisis. And the question is on how to deal with disposal of older yet still functional computers, which do not meet the hardware requirements for Windows 11. Africa is already a big importer of second-hand electronics, which are often the most affordable option for people seeking access to technology in low and middle income countries. So all these factors compiled are what make this Windows 10 upgrade, Windows 11 upgrade a bigger challenge, a more significant challenge, even compared to other end-of-life requirements. So Microsoft has amended its support policies with regard to end of life. And in July 2025, Microsoft added a free ESU option for consumers. ESUs are typically a paid service to keep getting security updates, and this will be extended until October 13th, 2026. And for individuals and Windows 10 home users, the ESU will cost about $30 per device for 1 year. And for enterprises, ESUs can be purchased from a different program at $61 per device for the first year, with the cost doubling each year thereafter. So the cost becomes quite significant when applied across multiple computers in an underserved region. And for governments and departments and schools, for example, or clinics already facing resource constraints, this can become an issue. So we have a couple of recommendations for end-of-life management. There's a lot of measures on what can be done to manage the process of end-of-life, and some of the measures are vendor-led best practices. Some are international standard organizations best practices. For example, the ISO has come up with lifecycle management standards, and the ITU also has policy positions on the same. So some of these include lifecycle planning and asset management, and this is about knowing what you have, where it is, and how long it will be supported. Keeping an updated inventory of your hardware and software along with vendor timelines and all that will allow for future planning. For risk assessment and mitigation, before support ends, entities are encouraged to run a risk assessment and ask what security holes could appear, could compliance be affected, and then put in mitigation measures before the problem becomes an urgent situation. There's also the idea for network isolation and segmentation, and this means that for systems that you can't replace, you have the option to isolate them from the internet or other untrusted networks and implement access control such that if a device is compromised, it doesn't spread. And then we have security hardening. And this speaks to the idea that before the end of life date, you can apply the latest patches and turn off unnecessary features and keep monitoring for unusual activity. And lastly, we have awareness and communication to provide notice to all involved stakeholders, even beyond the stakeholders that particularly deal with IT issues, and to ensure that everyone is prepared for the transition. So we have jurisdictions that have made advances with regard to end-of-life management. The US, for example, has the National Institute of Standards and Technology related to information, which deals with work related to information security. And we also have the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, which mandates that all federal systems use software are updated, and if unavoidable, agencies must implement compensating controls to get waivers. In UK, we have the National Cybersecurity Centre, which mandates for the isolation of systems from untrusted networks, limited user accounts and privileges, and to use application whitelisting. We also have the Government Digital Service in the UK, which requires central government to budget for upgrades ahead of end-of-life dates. For the European Union, we have the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, which recommends tracking vendor support timelines, planning migrations before end of life, and decommissioning unsupported software. In Australia, we have the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which requires patching operation systems and replacing unsupported software. And also government ICT procurement guidelines require agencies to confirm the vendor support lifecycle before purchasing software. For Canada, we have the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and the government's Canada policy also mandates that the technology lifecycle plan to track, they recommend for tracking of the technology lifecycle plan. And Singapore policies require governments to remove unsupported software from production environments. In Africa, we have similar efforts, though a lot of African efforts are usually tailored to end-of-life support and end-of-life management from an e-waste perspective. So figuring out how to manage the e-waste aspect of end-of-life. So some key takeaways for African nations include integrating end-of-life consideration into procurement standards, requiring vendors to provide lifecycle timelines. African governments could require similar clauses to ensure public investments in technology remain sustainable and secure over time. Governments could also explore centralized negotiations for extended support with some of the vendors. There's also a gap where we need to create institutionalized end-of-life awareness and shift this beyond the people who typically deal with IT, just to create that awareness that this is an issue, and to set mandatory upgrade timelines. So some of the primary policy risks that can be highlighted from this include cybersecurity risks, because unsupported software could make government data susceptible to attacks, and this leaves a gap in such a way that government registries are vulnerable and they're exposed. Also, some economic risks include economic impact, because upgrades require incurred costs. So when these costs are unexpected, it can shift government resources from factors which are currently priorities to, not to say that this is not a priority, but it can shift, if it's not planned, it shifts government focus and expenditure priorities. So for service continuity, we require essential services, especially in health, education, and public administration. They require updated software, and they could be disrupted if outdated systems fail. Another policy risk is on digital inclusion, and it can widen the digital divide, as low-income users may be unable to afford newer systems. When it comes to regulatory compliance, organizations could fall out of compliance with data protection and cybersecurity laws if they use unsupported software. And without end-of-life policies, public agencies will lack the timelines and strategies to transition away from obsolete tech. And for national security, critical infrastructure running outdated software can become a vulnerability for state security. So these are just some of the primary policy risks that we will be unpacking later in the session. And I will hand it over to Mary to take over the remaining bit of the session.
Thanks, Joel, for helping us to be able to set the context into what we're discussing and why this is important. So normal end of lives have been happening, especially for, say, Microsoft and other service providers. And ideally, there has not been a risk, but when you look at Microsoft and the usage from a global scale, we've been able to look at the numbers. We are now at 55.95, I believe, for the African market, and now we're at 42 point something globally. This is still a huge number when you're looking at the user requirement. So again, goes back to the question of, I think what we'd want to discuss is, and looking at the numbers that you've been able to share from a cybersecurity perspective, what are the specific cybersecurity risks that are likely to emerge once then Windows 10 stops receiving updates? And how might this disproportionately impact users in low and middle income countries? Specifically, I'm looking at it from a concept of MSMEs and also schools and public institutions, where also there's constrained budgets and funding opportunities. So Alan, maybe you could help us unpack that.
Thank you, Mary. I think Jewel actually already went through that, but I'll just look at it from a very short perspective, cybersecurity. The main major threat or danger that there will be is, as Jewel said earlier on, that once the end of life is enforced, it kicks in. There won't be any more updates, be it security, cumulative updates, patches, nothing like that. So any vulnerability that is discovered after that particular cutoff date, 14th of October, it will be readily available in the wild, in the dark web. Exploits for it will be shared widely, and you'll have everybody from the experienced hackers to the script kiddies trying to take advantage of these particular vulnerabilities. So definitely you'll see an increase in all manner of threats. And I'm talking about ransomware attacks, I'm talking about malware, I'm talking about remote execution, I'm talking about remote desktop protocols being abused if a vulnerability is found out. I'm talking about increase in phishing attacks and scam attacks. How does that work? Basically, you'll get a number of pop-ups, especially if you're running Windows 7, sorry, not Windows 7, Windows 10, tech scams, which are on the increase in Africa, especially right now, and also in European countries. But I know you want to focus on the lower middle income countries. So that is the main danger that is there. Cyber threats will be on the increase, you name it, from ransomware attacks to malware to business email compromise. There will be an increase in that because it will be open season for Windows 10. How does that look like now for SMEs and small, medium-sized organizations or small scale users? Well, definitely they have to have either take up the extended support services, which is at $30 per device per year, if that is a feasible option for them, or they can come up with compensating measures whereby you can isolate those machines. But then again, if you have the capability of isolating a machine, let's say via VLANs or whatnot, network segmentation, then definitely you may have some money in the bank to actually upgrade your machines. So people who will be heavily affected by this are people who is just pray to your gods and hope that you're not a victim because of financial challenges. So it's really a scary factor because, as I said earlier on, I work with organizations in East, Central, and Southern Africa, and you still find Windows XP in some organizations.
Yeah.
You still find Windows 8.1, you still find Windows 7 running, and the people tell you this one, it's okay, I don't need to upgrade it. So it's going to be an interesting months after 14th of October. I hope I've answered your question how you wanted it to be answered.
Yes, I think you've answered the question, and you've also addressed the issue on the reality on ground where we still have people still on Windows 8. Well, we're talking about Windows 11, so this is a few years of upgrades that have happened. And there's also the conversation you brought in about the ESU. And I know as of sometime in April when we wrote our article on this, at that point, the extended user the extended service users was being charged at $30, but over the time, Microsoft has been able to amend that to say that consumers can actually get free upgrades, but this is attached to whether you actually signed up or you have subscribed to OneDrive so that you're able to back up your services, and then you'll be able to get the free service, or you can redeem 1,000 points to be able again to get the extended service users, which allows you to get updated securities up to October 2026. Now, this goes back to, I think, a conversation we were having with you, Daniel, a few days or weeks back when we were talking about attaching, what is it called, a service to another service, because now it means that if you're not paying for the OneDrive or Microsoft paid service, then also this will not apply to you. Maybe we can discuss that, where we're able to attach what is it called, requirements to another service, which again, it's attached to an additional cost, which not everyone can be able to afford.
Yeah, that's right. We're talking about some really boring science, technology studies kind of concepts, but really it's embedded in a word that all of us know: infrastructure. So we know infrastructure as grid lines, as roads, and the like. But I think the way I would like us to understand infrastructure, basically to reframe it, is not just as a thing, but as some kind of relation. So basically, we have, various things attached to each other. There was this joke by, I think it was asked to Stephen Hawking. Basically, Stephen Hawking was a physicist, and they were asking him about what supports the Earth, and he was like, it's basically on top of rabbits all the way down. But I think the joke here, and I'm trying to make it into a serious point, is it's really infrastructures all the way down. And as has been described in the preamble, and also as Alan carefully puts it, is just so much integration that cannot be easily wished away. So we can also look at critical infrastructure around education, around finance and health, but also we can look at infrastructure for the SMEs and for the ordinary users. So I think in that way, seeing how connected they are and seeing how the attack surfaces are widened, for me is a huge point of concern. I mean, I think also the other way I look at it is how much this tells us about what's happening out on the global scene, and maybe we can actually expand this point later. But if we see like the controls around ownership, around business, around security, and some of the regulations that guide that at the international level, we can see also them trickling down to say like Kenya or other countries in Africa and beyond. So I guess this is also a point of maybe provocation or inspiration to begin thinking about how do the regulations or the norms that guide end of life or similar kind of policies, say in the US, how do they trickle down to Kenya or to Africa, and what does Africa have to like contribute back to help them understand some of the potential implications?
Yeah. Sure. Thanks for that. I think we do have some policies and standards that have been set. So we have ITU, which is a global International Telecom Union, which has developed a guideline on end of life, but from an e-waste perspective. When it comes to the finance side, especially from card, we have the PCI DSS standards that have been set, whereby when you're developing a card management software, you need to put in end of life policies and be able to have a transition framework, and also it requires financial services providers to be able to have a framework in place on how to manage end of life. And a couple of others that are currently there, as even Joel has mentioned, we have countries that have been able to come up with some of these policies to be able to inform, especially from a public sector perspective. what is required, and from a funding perspective, how they can go about it, and also measures that they needed to be able to put in place to transition. So I'd just like to bring in DG here just to find out what role should government and national cybersecurity agencies play in supporting vulnerable sectors during this transition? And are there any examples of national or regional strategies that we could adapt from an African perspective or in any other lower income markets that we can actually be able to adapt? Or is it time now, even as the conversation we're having at the AU on regional harmonization of policies, is this time now AU now needs, as AU, we need to start having these conversations, and even in the Asia Pacific regions? Deji.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't mute before. Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question. Yes. So I think government and national cybersecurity agencies, they have a critical role to play in shielding vulnerable sectors during this particular transition, and particularly because a number of essential services, particularly in healthcare and I think education, are heavily dependent on software like the Windows 10. So these sectors will generally face a higher heightened risk of cyber attacks and malware once Microsoft ceases to support them. And the their dependence on it is not unfounded, right? In terms of how Microsoft actually allowed the software to be distributed and be used globally in this sense. I think governments must go beyond issuing advisories and develop clear strategies to be able to manage this transition. And it would include identifying where the risks are greatest, prioritizing the essential services for immediate support, and if possible, negotiating at maybe at regional level with Microsoft for extended security updates, ESUs, right? I think without that, particularly, the cost of inaction would probably be greater, both socially and financially, probably more socially than we can actually see itself. I think some of the costs may not be put into numbers, right? But it probably would also show at the end of the day. But I think it's not just a question of I think updates and new machines or software. We have a very reactive approach to these things, right? And this is something that I think we should have also thought about in terms of our technology life cycle, right? The smarter play would be to probably rethink our entire technology life cycle. We probably need to find a way to governments are going to find a way to invest in local repair, open source alternatives in terms of the software that they use, right, for their systems, particularly in schools, in primary healthcare facilities, in clinics, right, where getting state of the art or high-end hardware is probably unnecessary or difficult to maintain. Logistics of maintaining them quite difficult, right? We need to find long-term, cost-effective paths to be more to be more resilient in dealing with these kind of things, particularly because we don't, and this is because we don't take into consideration a lot of economic and environmental considerations when planning either upgrades or planning to use certain software or certain machines within the general ecosystem itself, right? And also, I think we have a very, very siloed thinking, both locally and within countries and also regionally and subnationally. We have a lot of silo thinking. So every government, so every agency thinks independently of the other. There isn't a general consensus on, okay, no, let's look at it broadly together. How can we maybe work together either as a regional bloc or as a country itself, right? To have a more distinct or resilient solution to these technology transitions itself. I think cybersecurity agencies can offer better and real-time and practical guidance to the governments themselves, right? And in terms of the kind of software to use, and governments also need to push for more regional collaboration in terms of pooling resources, sharing intelligence, which is probably one of the bigger issues, right? And negotiating as a block or as blocks, right? To be able to secure better deals. I think working together, two is better than one, as they always say, to be able to secure better deals with these technology giants, and also partnerships with think tanks, non-profits in the private sector would be also be essential to ensure that um, devices are probably recycled or reused in a manageable way, and also help us to manage risk, generally speaking, when it comes to building a more sustainable technology lifecycle system within governments, and the use of, let's say, foreign technology, and when they end up transitioning out. So we need to consider all these things together. I think they're all in one bucket together. They're all connected, right? But a lot of times we have silo thinking and we keep on separating it both on the national and also on the regional level. And if we can all put them together in the same pool and then strategize together to be able to make smarter decisions together as blocks and as countries in lower income or middle income countries, right? So the global south as a whole, I think we'll probably better off for it. Thank you.
Thanks, TJ. There's also, I think what we're getting at is it's time for us to start thinking as a region and be able to come up with strategies that actually inform us. And I think one of the biggest issues that has been raised, and which is why if you see what the ITU has been able to develop, which is a standard on e-waste, is a conversation on e-waste whereby apparently 60% of the e-waste in Africa comes from imported electronics, yet only 1% is formally collected and recycled. So as Kenya, I know we did develop the the extended producer regulation, which now mandates if you bring in a product into the country, it's your responsibility to be able to manage its recycling process. But then my other question is, so how can, and this will go to you, Owen, how can government and industry stakeholders in these regions actually prepare for surge in e-waste for Windows 11 and hardware requirements, and not just even Windows 11, which I know will bring a lot of surge in terms of waste from laptops, from a hardware perspective, just even from a futuristic aspect for other electronics moving forward. And is a current regulation for extended producer enough? Does it cover whatever we anticipate will be the wastage we are going to receive after this transition?
Thank you, Mary. I think that's a very critical question that we normally ask ourselves on a day-to-day basis in terms of once they start switching off Windows 10, where do we go from there? Where does all these laptops go? Where do all these devices go that are using Windows 10? And from a policy point of view, I think that three key things that we can do, as you've mentioned, the EPR is there. I know in Kenya right now it's facing some challenges, including some court sanctions and stops. So, but I think some of the key things that will address such a conundrum will be requiring the tech companies or the original equipment manufacturers to also finance the take back systems, the e-waste collection, the safe recycling systems. Because in the environmental ecosystem, there's something that we normally refer to as the producer pays principle, which means whatever you are responsible for producing, you're also responsible for taking care of it to ensure that it does not go into the waste, into the environment, into the ecosystem. So it is based on these tech companies, these original equipment manufacturers to ensure that once that the Windows 10 are not functioning, where do these equipments go? The other bit is a right to repair mandates, where focusing on the spare parts and the repairs which need to be done for these equipments to continue their life. I know a lot has been mentioned about extending the life of the equipments. So basically, how can this be done? How can the devices be kept instead of being replaced? Because being in the low middle income LMICs, we tend to be now more of a dumping site rather than a tech growing site, because we all agree that most of our machines now currently run on Windows 10. And once that is phased out, a lot of people struggle. I know for maintenance or for keeping that security feature, you need to add more money. I don't think we're able to, or everybody is able to do that in the low and middle income areas. So that is something that we have to be very realistic on, that might not happen for the low and middle income areas. So they will still retain the Windows 10, and they will pass it on to their relatives, to their other colleagues, and that will continue. So it's in terms of policy, ensuring that there's a right to repair policy will be very crucial. Ensuring there's a design for disassembly, whereby as the equipment manufacturers are designing these equipments, they are also factoring in how are they how are the assembled parts going to be disposed of. There are various ways you can look at it, looking at uh, components which are paired together or components which are not paired together, so that it allows for easy disassembly, and it allows for either that part to be used somewhere else or that part to continue to be used. So basically, it's how you ensure that the design of the equipment fits a sustainability matrix and is able to be used either for longer or is able to be disposed in a very economical way. In regards to operational commitments, I think partnerships play a very key part in this.
Yeah.
Partnerships between, let's say now, the software product providers and the hardware providers on how can they extend the lifespans of these equipments. So now I'm looking in this context, how can Microsoft partner with other people in Africa to ensure that as they're migrating, this is done in a responsible way and the equipments are being handled in an environmental friendly way. They can also go over and above and even provide subsidies and include the cost of purchasing for the equipment and for the software into the cost of actually recycling and environmentally disposing this equipment. So it's also an economic bit they can do. And also another important thing is publicly disclosing how much equipment you normally push to the low and middle income area, so that we normally say what is measured is managed. So
Yeah.
if we have an idea of what is coming in, we have an inventory and we know that we have these devices under Windows 10. So this is what we are responsible for collecting and putting out of the environment. And that can be followed through, can be tracked all in all, and to ensure that this equipment does not find its way into the landfill. Uh, Economically, you can look at how do you link the OEMs and the low and middle income areas and bring a take back system, so that that chain or that link can be as clear and as seamless as possible, whereby probably now you are not able to use your equipment. Are you going to take it back to your provider? What is your provider going to do with it? So also clarity on what happens to this equipment is very important, especially now with Windows 10 being phased out. So I think that's mostly what I believe from a policy and from an operational point of view, what can be done to ensure that we do not get to a point where we are dumping or we are polluting our environment with obsolete electrical equipments.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And maybe we can just add a clarification. So we know that not all Windows 10 laptops will be phased out, because I think it's anything that was manufactured post 2018, and it's like late 2018 when SPTM2 was not in place, because I think that is one of the 2.2, because that is one of the requirements, the hardware requirements, and they started being implemented in 2018, and it's late 2018. So a few of the 2018 laptops meet this specification, while others don't. There's also some other hardware requirements, which makes it very hard for anyone to just do the normal upgrades that we're used to for Windows, and that's where this conversation is heading to. And I know these are not part of the conversation we discussed, but it's just critical for me to bring this out in terms of the aspect of fairness, in terms of now we have a software provider, because as we know, Microsoft is not in the hardware space as much. Now adding a hardware requirement, and then they've not been able to develop the partnership conversations. Is that something that we need to be able to look at from a policy perspective in terms of now software providers mandating hardware requirements? And I'll ask this going to want Alan to give his perspective from also what they do at ESET, because they also do support softwares. Daniel and Deji, just giving from a perspective at this conversation now we need to be able to have to be able to limit, because now it means any software provider can now start adding hardware requirements to be able to support the software upgrades, and they're not part of the hardware ecosystem as or even that specific hardware ecosystem.
I think it's twofold, really, in that it may be fair in that Microsoft also does not want to control the entire ecosystem, including up until hardware, which it would be welcome in most instances, because you don't want to lock in the vendor, both software and hardware, under one house. I mean, it's dangerous from a cybersecurity perspective. So it is fair that they do not have that capability of giving us the hardware. And also because technology is advancing, we are talking about LLMs that are also able to run on user machines. So they require a bit more advanced processing capabilities, a bit more hardware capabilities. Technology is moving. It would only be fair that even users keep up. It would be because even us at ESET, there are some machines, operating systems we no longer support because the technology that we use will strain that particular device. So it will be a disadvantage for you to upgrade, whereas you're still running the legacy operating system and legacy hardware. So that's why it would be fair. Why would it not be fair is that when you look at now, the focus was on low middle income countries. I mean, users have just recently upgraded to Windows 10. They have forked out some finances to upgrade to Windows 10. Now, no sooner had they just settled down on Windows 10, now they are forced to actually go to Windows 11, which means doing what we call a technological refresh or a hardware refresh in the organization. So it would not be fair, but given where the world is heading, it is a necessary step to upgrade the hardware.
Okay. Daniel?
Yeah, I would like to push back on a few points that have been made. But I would also want to first make a few quick clarifications, maybe rejoinders on some of the points. I think one by Deji, another one by Owen, and then I'll jump into this software hardware kind of dynamic. So I think Deji mentioned something around open source, which we could tie to sovereignty. So I know, like in Denmark, there is an experiment right now. I think it was maybe piloted a few months back around like using Linux LibreOffice to basically replace the Microsoft 365 Office package. And even for countries that are established, that are economically powerful, we can argue these are also topical issues for them. So I think this could also be a relevant moment for us to kind of like begin thinking carefully about what the alternatives might be.
Yeah.
Then the other point is kind of tied back to maybe Owen. I think you mentioned something really interesting around the triple P, the producer pays principle. Also, you can also think about it as the polluter pays principle. So basically, it emerges in economics in the 70s and 80s, which basically trying to tie manufacturers and producers to environmental kind of commitments. And I think what's really interesting is how this market has been financialized. So I don't know if you've heard of carbon credits. So they actually dump stuff here, then they buy carbon credits. I think actually Kenya has the largest carbon credit in project in Africa, and they buy carbon credits. It could be Kenya
I
and
think
Morocco.
should be DR. Okay, but again, we can research. I think it could also be DRC, but yeah.
Yes. So all of these like financialized or third-party markets have different implications. But just really coming back to the software hardware dynamic, I want to embed the debate or the conversation in like really old debates in antitrust law. So I'm not a lawyer, big disclaimer. But I teach law adjacent courses to information science, computer science, and other allied fields at undergraduate level. And one of the things that really stands out to me is how much antitrust regulation in America is bipartisan, rather is partisan. So the government in power kind of like dictates the direction. So in this case, I don't look at it as being inevitable, having to say upgrade the hardware. I look at it as a case of political contingencies, which are open to debate and negotiation and even speculation. And let me concretize a little bit about antitrust. So antitrust in Kenya would be around competition law or competition regulation. But I think the way antitrust was really framed back in the US over 100 years ago was to really protect customer welfare because of the powers of the trusts. So we know of the oil trusts and the manufacturing trusts and the like. So basically, and I think if I can just pull this back to maybe the last 30 years, we've seen monopoly power, especially from the big tech operations. And I mean, Microsoft, ironically, has, I think, taken the largest fines with this whole operating system issue. And for me, what that showed is that there was actually demonstrable negative effects that emerged from Microsoft's like monopoly power. And in many cases, the regulation basically and the pushback from the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Consumer Commission was basically to enable us to see some of the gaps and pushback. So what does this mean for end of life for Windows? And again, I don't know how this could strategically be pulled off, but I think given the global reach and the global appeal of companies like Microsoft, I think there has to be like some kind of global alliance. So we talk about the ITU, we talk about WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. We talk about the UN, which also has like different kind of principles and frameworks around things that we care about around open source and software. But how can we meaningfully and practically pull this off? So I think one of them is to actually demonstrate that there is actually harm happening. So making the same arguments that resonate with antitrust. Of course, I mean, I could talk a little bit more about how these platforms are actually making arguments that they're making products much better, so protecting consumer welfare. But I think that's a debate for another day. But I think for me, it's really finding these strategic alliances. And if we're actually able to talk back to the US, for me, I believe in many ways that's where the power is. So we've seen some of the concerted efforts that have actually produced the Right to Repair Act in New York City, in New York State, and it's now in 6 other states. We've seen some of those concerted like community-led efforts. So how do we go beyond just the community here locally to speak back to where actually the power is? So this is like a real pragmatic approach. And I don't feel very positive because of the partisan nature, and I think you've seen the rollbacks that the Trump administration has been engaged in. So I'm not sure what this looks like practically, but I believe one of the more reasonable ways would be really to talk back to the US in some way, whether through civil society, whether through strategic litigation, or public awareness and campaigns.
Yeah.
Hi, Daniel. What are we referring to here, Daniel? The we talking back. What are you
Yes,
referring to as we?
yes, absolutely. So we I think as actors in this space, so could be in civil society, including Mary's outfit, could be um
The G's
um
outfit, because we do almost the same thing, and they
Yeah,
are more present is actually in the Americas than we are.
I asked because a lot of times to talk back requires leverage. So a lot of this party, and that's the way it works, right? You're right. I agree with you on some of the points you mentioned. There's a political element to it as well, and the government of the day usually decides on how these things work. But a lot of times, how the cases end up in the reality is it depends on. It's a lot of deal making. The country that is America is a deal making machine in itself with lots of strings and elements that fall back into low medium countries like Africa or in Latin America, for example. And a lot of times, the end it ends up being who has the leverage in itself. It's also leverage even African countries don't have as a whole. So I wonder how much can we scratch as a think tank or an NGO without having what's the word, an economic power to be able to negotiate or talk back to them in itself, because the African countries as a whole seem to always cower and go to Washington to talk, to listen. They don't talk, they go there to listen as a whole. And a lot of times you find out the think tanks or non-profits that the government listens to are backed by powers within the US as well. So my worry is always having that part. How can we have that leverage to be able to get them to listen? Because even the original blocks within the continent themselves also don't have that leverage in it, don't have the leverage currently, right? Because they're not backed by the right powers within the US to actually talk to the government themselves.
Yeah, I kind of agree that you need to be able to have leverage, and I think there's also for lack of a better word, a failure by even the consumer bodies who are supposed to be even addressing some of these issues and to be able to push it from even just from
The consumer,
a human rights, even consumer rights perspective, and even because now technology has become more of like a human rights because it's part of access. So because this has an impact to when you're talking about digital access, digital inclusion, this actually exacerbate that into a point that a lot of people will end up also not being able to they will lose on the access bit, and also inclusion bit will also be lost. I think again,
Can I jump in briefly?
yeah.
I fully agree with and sorry for hogging the mic. I fully agree on the point of leverage. And as someone who's been in the internet governance space also in the last few years, I've seen what actually leverage really looks like. And that's why I'm happy this conversation is happening. I think one thing that maybe has been a huge failure on our side is the ability to circumscribe issues and articulate them. So most of these are technical issues, and we can see similar dynamics in around environmental governance, the old school internet governance, and I think also we see it with recently AI governance. So I feel the ability to articulate these issues at a very deep level is going to enable us to be able to like sketch out the matrices and through which would actually have to play our game. So if it's an issue of leverage, I would practically looking at alternatives and sketching out like a 20-year plan be worth it, or would something around like Microsoft's efforts to build data centers in the Rift Valley in Kenya be one of the bargaining chips. So I believe like the ability to articulate these issues on a very deep and foundational level, for me is one step to a longer journey.
Yeah. I
uh,
think what we're getting is go ahead, did you?
no, go on, no, go on.
No, I just wanted to say I think what I'm getting is we need to find a balance and be able to see what can we bring to the table. I think also a very good point is the fact that I think we have higher numbers in this region. We can use that as a bargaining chip. But then the question is, are the people who sit in this table, especially government, do they even see the impact? Or is this going to be a case of what happened with Windows 7 when the migration was happening and it get to a point that it became a critical need and people were scramming, including people in the financial services space, and it's at the point when cyber attacks became a bit more. There was an increase in cyber attack in the financial services space, and that's when people started to realize, oh, we need to migrate to Windows 7 to be able to get some of the security patches. Yeah. Yeah, so Deji can proceed with what you wanted to say.
Oh no, I wanted to just add that although that easily hogging the mic, that I think this kind of confusions, that this kind of back and forth are very necessary in terms of helping with the flow of the conversation and bringing more light to the issues. That's what I'm just saying.
Yeah, true. So the other thing I wanted us to be able to have a discussion on in what lessons can be drawn on from Microsoft's past end of support events, and how can this inform more secure and inclusive transition strategies for LMICs? And is there a way also the extended security updates program can be enhanced to be able to better serve us in the low and middle income economies, and what would secure and equitable support model look like in practice? Deji, you can go first, then I'll go to Owen, and then
Can you ask the question
also
again?
Alan's perspective. So I wanted to know, what can we be able to draw from Microsoft's past end of support events, and how can we be able to use this, just the previous events that have happened in end of support, and how can we be able to use this to inform secure and inclusive transitions and strategies for those in the low and middle income economies? And then also, is there a way that the ESUs, that is the extended security updates by Microsoft, could be leveraged to better or enhanced to be able to better serve countries in this market? And then the other question was, how would a secure and equitable support model look like in practice? I think that Alan can be able to help us unpack the secure models.
Yeah, so I think I think we don't learn our lessons, generally speaking, right? Or we won't learn our lessons, and it's for a number of reasons. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of silo thinking around the previous transitions and what's going to happen now. And I think the ESUs are just like a band-aid on a wound in itself, right? I don't think they're a long-term solution in itself, in any sense, right? But I think they do give a sense of comfort to certain governments and government agencies that, oh yeah, it may be, it's happening now, but still there's a period, extended period, they do come around. Now, so I always have my issues with big tech. I always have my issues. I'm very distrusting. Yeah. So I will be first to say that I don't really trust the ESUs in itself, right? In terms of how secure or how concentrated they are, in terms of, when you really want to make something work, particularly because of economic or financial reasons, right? So I already have my issues with that. I've always had my issues with that, right? So it then comes to light again that, okay, yeah, even negotiating with companies like Microsoft in itself, right? How secure would these updates be, and for how long in itself? There's so much going on in this universe of Microsoft that for them to concentrate on this particularly, because they're not a non-profit, they're for profit in itself. So I do think that the lessons that we need to learn would be to find either ways to bargain with them better before this comes around, and then because it's likely going to happen again in the future. Again, at some point, there probably occur to happen with Windows 11 as well. At some point, it will going to happen as they continue to phase out old technology or old operating systems over a period of time. And the quicker we come to terms with that, the better we'll be at negotiating or bargaining, or probably finding viable alternative solutions to the problems, right? And the solutions will probably be, whether it's in the form of, like I said, leverage earlier, negotiating better, or, sorry to say, just find ways to copy over time. I won't mention the continent that copies. There's a continent that they thrive on copying. I won't go, but I use copy, not reverse engineering, but it's copying, right?
Yeah.
But this is why they do it, and they find a way to make it legal in a sense. And you see, and that's why the issue is they find a way to say, hey, how about you train us in this thing? We want to make our own as well. They let you know from the start, and it's why a lot of Western powers have issues going to that particular area of the world, because they are big on copying for a certain reason. They're not copying to make profits for themselves alone, but they realize the essence in having things like this happen to them over a period of time. You can't just yank the carpet off their legs. They want to always be in control. So after a period of being, so we are so used to these technologies that once these issues happen, we scramble. Everybody's scrambling, looking for what we're going to do to survive, and maybe we need to find ways to, a longer term plan to begin to also copy this in a sustainable manner to be able to stand on our 2 feet over a period of time.
Yeah, without bringing copyright issues to the conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Which is why I said they find a way to make it legal. Actually,
Yeah.
they've actually,
Yeah.
it's quite genius in their ways. Yeah, they find a way to make it quite genius, and it's really helping them. So we probably could take copy from their own copying to make it better for ourselves in the long term. And it's something they've been doing for the past 25 to 30 years. So it's not a one day thing. It's been done it's systematically done, and they've concretized it now, and now it's working for them.
Okay. And how can we learn from the previous transition? And I think also maybe not to mention companies, but I know there's a company that does a lot. I think they handle their end of life quite sustainably, whereby you don't get updates on the operating system, but you're still able to use the hardware up to a certain point in time. Yes, it does have a bit of lags, a bit of delays, but you don't. It's not as noticeable as it used to. So you see that people still get to enjoy their electronics compared to what we have currently in the market, especially like in the phone space, what we've been able to see at some point, you just have to throw away a phone. So how can we learn from like Windows, what they used to do? This is the first, actually, this is the first Windows upgrade that's coming with a hardware requirement since the life of Microsoft. So how can we be able to use what used to happen previously to be able to address some of the risks that we've already discussed? On.
I think, thank you, Mary. I think, from my point of view, I think one of the biggest things that most producers of this, let's say now, the Windows 10, the ones that are going to be phased out, is normally an issue of global strategy vis-a-vis local strategy, and how you can blend the two, where a one-size-fit-all solution is normally not the best practice. I know before, even in your business class, they will normally tell you as a global company, you need to adopt global strategy where you are doing the same kind of product all through, for all your markets, and this gives you either a reduction in costs due to the numbers you'll produce, or other benefits that you'll get out of it. But we're moving to a point now that organizations need to look at a blend between a global and a localization strategy. And that is now coming into Africa and coming into the low middle income countries. How can you develop strategies that are adapted to these areas? Looking at the extended security updates, looking at the current situation, how can you adapt your strategies to these markets? Various ways looking at, and this is just me thinking out of the box, Can you vary the pricings? Can you provide packages for, let's say, schools, communities, which are not able to transition as fast or as seamless as maybe the big enterprises which have the financial muscle to. So being able to adopt the updates and the solutions to the markets now becomes a very important bit, because it also enhances reputation. It also enhances, as a company, your reputation as a responsible organization. Also bringing in partnerships. I always talk about partnerships. How are the global companies, how are Microsoft able to partner with local organizations to advance this? Because from an EU point of view, this can be done by the OEMs themselves. They can do it. But when it comes to Africa or the low and middle income countries, it's a different ball game altogether. They will have to leverage on partners who are already on the ground, who are already doing things, who know what is working and what is not working, and basically now adapting a strategy to these unique situations will help them a lot. I think for me that's what they need to what I will pick from the previous migrations, and what if they continue doing and going forward, I know there will be more requirements, more needs to migrate. I think when they start adopting such strategy, it will become easier for them and easier for their customers and their clients.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the things for MS to think about is being able to put updates and align it with the realities on ground, because I feel like this update is one that's not aligned to the reality on ground, and also the requirement for hardware. They haven't come out clearly to explain why. Like, I think you don't need something bulky. Maybe also have like a Windows 10 point that can be used with, with the hardware, with the machines that do not have a certain capability, so that you're not leaving everyone behind. Maybe that could be something they could consider. Yeah. Alan, I'd want to understand, to get from you your perspective on from a security aspect. What I wanted to get from you is how can we learn from the previous, especially from a security perspective?
Thank you, Mary. Maybe just to pick up from the question you just asked, if Microsoft can come up with maybe 10.1 that will have these capabilities, does not require certain hardware changes. But then again, when we look at the organization that is in question at this particular moment, Microsoft, they have shown a history of really it's about the bottom line. A case in point would be recently they announced laying off over, was it 10,000 or 1,000 employees, just coming off a good financial year. So you can see really where their priorities are. So it's hopeful, but highly unlikely. So what can we learn from the previous end of life? The first thing that we can learn is end of life does not mean end of usage. The risk will still linger on. As you said, majority of the users will continue using these operating systems because of various challenges that all of us have discussed. So case in point is XP is still widely used in the organizations. You'll be very surprised. And one thing we also learned is, even though end of life may be enforced, but if serious need for security update, it will actually be released. I don't know whether you guys remember SMB version 1, MS17 010. It was called Microsoft Eternal Blue. I don't know whether you remember that vulnerability, whereby, I mean, even out of band operating systems such as XP and Windows Server 2003, actually patches were released. However, this is not sustainable. I think the major thing that we can learn is that end of life does not mean end of usage, and also for organizations it also means that even other third-party solutions may not really be viable for your organization, because they would want to keep up with the latest operating system, which has the latest patches, because even themselves, they're putting themselves at risk, saying they support or they will work on an operating system that the vendor themselves do not support. So it's also difficult. And also, how can we maybe learn from these lessons? For all organizations, they need we can't rely on the ECU, as everybody has mentioned. This is just like a band-aid. It's a short-term fixed. It is not sustainable. Financially, it is not sustainable financially and also practically. But also, I don't remember who mentioned the thought or the option of exploring free source operating systems, but even they also do suffer from end of life. Example would be CentOS. Another one would be Ubuntu. So they also do refreshes. So even going end of life is not end of life. Open source, you may not really give you the flexibility and the user friendliness that is associated with Windows. So another thing that organizations maybe can do is come up with a proper plan. How do you do technological refresh before it is an emergency? I'll give an example. I mean, especially as Kenyans, I don't know whether the Kenyans in the room remember Huduma number registration. So there's a friend of mine who was actually in line on the deadline to do the Huduma number registration. And when the government announced that they were doing an extension of another 2 weeks, this particular individual online actually came from the line and went home and said, you know what, I've been given another 10 days, another 14 days, I'll come back at that time. Organizations need to stop playing that game whereby you wait until the last minute. Come up with a proper plan for any organization. Yes, we can talk about, big tech is in need for the money. Big tech is forcing us to upgrade, but that's the world we live in. We leave it to the policy advocates, to the people who make policies to try and agitate that change, and even ourselves. But from a practical perspective, every organization need to have a plan whereby you do it in a safe manner and not just wait for the cutoff date and mitigate some of this risk, which we've spoken about, network segmentation. If possible, go open source, hardening the operating system, hardening the device, just to ensure if you're not able to upgrade, then at least you have mitigating factors.
Yeah, I think that for me, that's a very good point where people need to have a plan. But I'm also looking at, I'm an SME, I'm a small business owner. I have my 2-3 machines that I use for my business, or even one machine that I use for my business. I'm not a techie, I'll give a context of what happens in Kenya, and maybe Deji can give us what happens maybe in Nigeria or West Africa. It's the fact that it's usually I have a machine that I use, and I use it maybe for my sales and to be able to monitor my stocks and all that. I got it pre-installed by a guy we have one guy who does this whole particular building. We know what happens even in terms of even OS. It's the fact that it's a cracked OS that's one purchase but used by multiple other users who do not need to pay for the same. So now I'm an SME. IT is not part of my budget anyway. It doesn't feature anywhere. But I stand to risk because at the end of the day, once the system is hacked, that's it. And access to other important and critical websites or pages that I use, it affects my business. So what can this person do?
Maybe before Deji comes in, I would say this. In cybersecurity, we have a principle, rather saying, if you cannot afford a data breach, then you can afford to protect your information. Even that individual SMEs, because I deal with them almost on a daily, they need to take some steps, because when the regulator comes in and says, hey, we are moving to eTeams, we're moving to this particular tax payment platform, we have to comply. Everybody complies. There is no way around it. And same thing when it comes to technology. You want to be in business, you cannot not afford to upgrade. I know there are challenges, but you have to do it. And it's upon now the business owners to be proactive. And also the vendors themselves, they can do a lot of education, they can do a lot of awareness. Policymakers can do a lot of awareness. Governments, because they are the ones who are going to be really affected in terms of hospitals, schools, they are government entities. They're still using Windows 10, so they should come and actually and educate the public on such things. So they cannot not afford it. It's I think personally, I stand to be corrected, it may be a lazy way of doing things, because they go on the internet, they do e-commerce.
Yes.
So they have to protect themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I know our time is almost up. So just maybe what I wanted to get is, and it's good that you've been able to say it's something that needs to be planned into. So then the other question, what I wanted to discuss is, is there room for government to enforce private entities to start being more conscious of whatever policies and processes they put in place that affect the larger masses. Because again, the conversation here is we'll always say we're not the only provider for such services, but there's open market and people can go to other providers. But now, can governments be able to enforce such requirements, or does it make it not a friendly space to be in, especially for private sectors who are trying to operate and be able to operate sustainably? Because as we've said, at the end of the day, for them, their focus is their margins. Seji, Daniel, anyone else? This is to all of us.
I'll have a quick one. I think the question is a little bit two-sided, given the inefficiencies in government in many governments. So I feel this is also an opportunity for government to seriously take infrastructure and cybersecurity issues. At the same time, I think it's also there could be space for incentives, but also a more like encompassing framework. And I think some of the recent ones I've seen in Kenya are the CBK, and there's another body that kind of like does cybersecurity work, are trying to, ask the banks and financial institutions to query their relationships with third-party service providers around AI services and also cybersecurity and fraud mitigation. So I think it's both sides. So again, the government really needs to look deep inward. We know there are significant failings on that end, but then also create these spaces, including the incentives for the private sector to play along.
Okay, I'm cognizant we have 1 minute to the clock. So maybe I'll just let Alan be able to also mention that. So for anyone who doesn't know, ESET, they do cybersecurity software for a company, but I'll let Alan speak into that. And as you also answer, how can users in resource constrained settings keep unsupported Windows 10 systems as secure as possible? So you can give them solutions that, as I said, you're able to support with.
Well, I won't give them solutions that will support Windows 10 because even us, we will definitely won't be supporting them for far too long. But it's basically the Slovakian company that does cybersecurity. We do mainly endpoint protection, mail protection. They also provide a solution called EDR. Basically, this is a threat hunting solution. We have presence in Africa, in over 21 countries in Africa, and expanding. So that's what we do. How can organizations that are financially constrained handle this change? Number one is they need to, like we said earlier on, have a plan. Okay, fine. I know this will not be supported. How can I do? Well, what will I do rather? Number one is uninstall any unnecessary solutions. Stop some protocols that are not necessarily needed, like RDP. If you're running an operating system that is no longer supported, RDP should not be enabled at all.
What is RDP?
Remote desktop protocol. That is whereby you access a machine remotely. So you disable that functionality, and also you can upgrade from SMB. Any organization at this time is using SMB, server message block version 1. Then they need to go to version 2, which is more protected, and also ensure that you have browser security. Basically, try as much as possible to run the latest version of any software that is running on that particular machine. If it's a slightly bigger organization whereby they have a network, a perimeter firewall, they can do a bit of segmentation, they can do a bit of VLANs, that is virtual LAN, basically whereby all machines that are running an outdated operating system are locked within one particular area, and you control the traffic to that particular organization, to that particular VLAN. Another thing is also complement or augment your security. Install things like two-factor authentication, so that when anybody logs in, at least there's that additional level of security. And finally, you can invest in reputable antivirus such as ESET. However, that will only last you so long.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are tangible solutions that people could use. Alternatively, just upgrade to Windows 11. It is free, so long as your machine meets the requirements. So thank you everyone for just being able to take time for us to discuss this pertinent conversation. I wish we were having it more, especially from us who are in the African region or even in the Asian region, because we get to be the most impacted. I know the reality for people, especially in the rural areas and even in the super marginalized areas. This is going to hit them hard. We've had conversations even in our own parliament where there's a county where they don't even have cameras for their own internal processes. So now we're even talking about maybe they just still have that one desktop, which is a very old desktop. And this is the reality, even especially in a lot of government institutions in the rural areas. So I hope we can have this conversation, and I hope our governments of the day could actually be able to take this seriously and support and be able to put in place policies. As we've said, Microsoft is high time now we start having conversations of partnership, be it partnership with hardware providers or be it partnership with think tanks and consumer organization bodies to be able to understand what are the pain points and how they can effectively be able to support this. Again, something that has come up, well, we think global, we also need to have a localization aspect whereby let's put the local realities in place and be able to come up with policies and systems and strategies that actually address the local realities. And I don't think that will cost much, because again, it also shows you're working with the market as is, and you're putting them into consideration, because they are also an important aspect. What you've said, Alan, complement, argument, and be able to argument, also put in other security measures in place, not just having one security process in place. Plan for your IT and infrastructure upgrades. I think that kind of summarizes what we've been able to discuss. What Daniel also said, government now need to look at infrastructure as a critical aspect and be able to start having conversation from that standpoint and use it, and to be able to leverage global entities to start thinking about local solutions. Yeah, thank you guys. We reach out for further conversation, and see you all next time.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.